So in my work teaching and mentoring other yoga teachers, I have commonly seen these 5 mistakes over and over. So this happens for regular yoga teachers, but also those that I train in my pregnancy yoga teacher training. And look, if I'm being honest, I've made some of these mistakes myself in the early days of teaching, and it wasn't until I started practicing whilst pregnant and doing a lot of pregnancy yoga classes that I realized that these are the things I was coming up against time and time again. So it doesn't matter if you've made these mistakes or are currently making mistakes. The point of this video is really to just reflect on our practice and learn and grow from there. So the number 1 mistake that I commonly see is teachers being overly cautious with their pregnant yoga students and offering them only super gentle options instead of still taking them through the range of the practice that we would do in a regular yoga class. So just because they are pregnant does not mean that they can't go through the same sort of structure that you might do in a regular vinyasa class, for instance, where you would do a warm-up and then build up to a peak pose or philosophy, and then do a cool down and a meditation. I find many yoga teachers, particularly those who haven't specifically trained in pregnancy yoga or maybe haven't experienced it themselves, are often overcautious and really worried about somehow hurting the baby or instructing something that might then cause mum an injury. So I think we all need to come back to this truth that pregnancy doesn't mean that they're delicate or that they're incapable or that there's anything wrong with them. In fact, pregnancy is often a time where we feel strongest and most confident in our bodies. So how do you avoid making this mistake? You need to learn how to modify the practice for the 3 trimesters because they are really different. How you feel in the first trimester is going to be worlds apart to how you feel and move in your body in the 3rd trimester. Sometimes even day to day can feel really different. So as a yoga teacher, you need to understand those differences and then how you can offer modifications and options so that women across the trimesters can choose something that's going to work for their body. So as an example of this, let's think about Malasana. For trimester 1, this full Malasana variation, or maybe even a more active pose with the heels grounded, might be great for your first trimester students, or it may not. As the belly gets bigger, the hips start to become more open, they may be able to get into this pose, but it might feel too uncomfortable for the belly, they might feel out of breath, it may just not feel good in their body anymore. At this stage, you might bring in a bolster and make it a really gentle variation, coming into our Malasana here. As their belly grows even further, maybe you take it to a half Malasana variation. So they're still getting the opening of the pose, but we're making it more accessible for their bodies. As they get to the later stages of the 3rd trimester, you might also want to bring in a chair and bring the squat all the way up to a chair. So they'll still be in that squatting position, but they won't be doing any of the work in the legs. If you want to learn more about squatting and modifying squatting for pregnancy in particular, there'll be a video linked in the description box below. So another way to avoid this mistake of making your pregnancy yoga classes too gentle is to not do that and to offer really strong options. The way that you do this for pregnancy is you offer lots of props and lots of variations. So maybe you start with an option that doesn't involve as much strength and you show them variations of that to build up to quite a strong pose. So an example of this in a pregnancy yoga class is giving the option of a downward facing dog. You can do a regular down dog. You could bring them onto a chair so their hands are on a chair. You could bring their hands into the wall. And then to make it even stronger, you could ask them to lift and engage one leg. So your students can choose to move into those poses at any time, and you can encourage them to come out of those poses at any time. So you're still offering those stronger options for the women who are feeling good in their bodies and want to build some heat. But for those women who do need those more restorative options, you've got them built in as choices throughout the class. And I think this is where it comes back to when you're teaching any yoga, but pregnancy yoga in particular, you really want to be teaching them to listen to their own body and to tune into what feels right in my body today. And I think this is where the beauty and the power of pregnancy yoga comes from, because that journey of learning to listen to your own intuition is going to be so helpful in birth. It's going to be so helpful during motherhood. And I think that is just such a gift that your students are going to get from your classes. So the second mistake that I see pregnancy yoga teachers in particular making is really focusing on resting and opening the body and forgetting about strength and stability. So this is definitely still related to the last point, but this is more about the actual poses we're choosing. So I see a lot of Supta Baddha Konasana. I see a lot of wide leg forward fold. I see a lot of these poses that are designed to open and release through the pelvis, and not a lot of focus on strengthening the muscles that support the pelvis. And during pregnancy, this can become a problem for a lot of women, particularly those who've practiced a lot of yoga throughout their life, myself included. If we don't keep the muscles strong around the pelvis, then as our body is naturally releasing with this relaxin that's coursing through the body, we can overstretch, and this creates pain. We end up with SPD pain in the front of the pelvis, or SI pain in the back of the pelvis. Maybe there's a general achiness in the hips. This is because there's instability in the pelvis and those muscles aren't strong enough to support. So we want to focus on alignment. We want to focus on keeping the knees underneath the hips, and we want to focus on engaging the muscles of the inner thigh. Often by putting a block there can be a really helpful modification. We want to still offer and encourage the opening, but we also want to balance that with poses that encourage strength and stability. So again, you can do this in your yoga classes by including poses that help to build that deep core strength and that pelvic floor strength. Things like pelvic tilts and bridge pose and squats, and really focusing on engaging those muscles that you want to be turned on whilst in these poses. If you want more information specifically on engaging the pelvic floor for pregnancy, I have a video on that as well. It will also be linked below. In my opinion, the block is the most underrated prop in a pregnancy yoga class. We often focus on blocks as a prop for those really strong yoga poses, and therefore it doesn't come into our pregnancy yoga classes as much. We're often more likely to be using blankets and bolsters to make the practice soft and comfortable. But blocks are so great for bringing our awareness to that alignment and to that engagement of those muscles. So bring it in between your knees in a bridge pose to really focus on engaging the inner thigh and the glutes. Bring it in between the knees in a chair pose or a wall squat to, again, bring in that engagement and alignment. I think sometimes we can shy away from standing poses in our pregnancy yoga classes and do a lot more floor-based work. But I don't think we should. I think we should encourage our pregnant students to lean into the edge a little bit, not push past it, but learn how to feel discomfort in the body and how to breathe through it. So I often do this in my pregnancy yoga classes with wall squats. This is a really great one to practice difficult sensations in the body. I usually teach a breath work before we go into this. And then I encourage them to hold for as long as they can. They can press into the wall for support, they can come out if they need at any time, but it's about feeling the muscles of the legs burn a little bit and build a little bit of heat, and then learning how to breathe through that. And wall squats are a really great, safe option for that. The third mistake I often see in pregnancy yoga classes is not teaching your students to trust in their own body awareness and intuition. If you are fearful of teaching pregnancy yoga, so therefore you put a strong emphasis on the physical cues to make sure your students stay safe, so this is coming from your own place of fear because you want them to stay safe, I think that draws away from them learning to trust, does this feel good in my body? And of course there's a balance, because some people who are brand new to yoga still need to learn, I don't actually know what feels good in my body and I need those physical cues. But it's also allowing space for them to listen and trust and adjust where possible, and not fixating on they need to have their foot here or their knee there, or it needs to look a certain way. And so the number one way you do this is to just give your students the space and encourage them to ask themselves, how does this feel? And encourage them to move in a way that feels good for them, or adjust their body in a way that feels good to them. I think we also do it by offering options, lots of options throughout our pregnancy yoga classes, and letting them choose what props they bring into their practice and modeling the full spectrum. So for example, a dancer's pose against the wall. You could be just doing a full dancer's pose if you're really strong in your practice, feeling really good in your body. You could also bring your hand to the wall for support. So if you're feeling a little bit off balance today, if you can't quite reach the back foot, we could bring a strap in. There are so many options. We could even bring it to a tree pose if dancer's not feeling good in our body today. And I think we also bring in this reverence for our body's own intuition by encouraging those deeper practices like meditation, like visualization, like mantra and affirmation. If you want to know more about these things specifically, I have another video. It'll be linked in the description box. But it's these practices that really bring us deeper into that connection of what does my body need right now? Of course, for many people in mainstream yoga, they need to start with the physical body, and that's a perfectly good place to start. But I think that's the beauty of a yoga class, is that it can be 80% physical, but then we can weave in these practices of breath work and meditation to start bringing them a little bit deeper in a way that they probably wouldn't ordinarily practice in their daily lives. I think the fourth mistake a lot of teachers make is not asking the right questions or creating the culture where you can learn about their specific pregnancy conditions that are going on. So pregnancy can be a tricky time. There can be a lot going on physically for a woman. And if you are teaching pregnancy yoga classes, you do need to know about what specific conditions are going on for the students in your class. You could do this through a conversation at the start of class. So as they walk in, asking them what's going on for you, how's your week been? I often teach my pregnancy yoga classes in blocks of 5 weeks so that I get to know them throughout this time, and then they typically feel more comfortable telling me if something is going on for them and their bodies. If you didn't want to have to ask that specific question at the start of each class, you could foster a circle-like environment at the start of class where maybe there's space at the start to just have conversation with each other and with you about how their week's gone, how their body's been feeling. And then also at the end of class, always encourage them to let you know what's going on with their body. So if something comes up next week, they're more likely to seek you out and tell you, hey, I've got this little niggle here this week, and let you know what's going on for them. And then the final mistake that I see too often is really overlooking the emotional journey of pregnancy. Now, of course, you're not a counselor. You're not going into a pregnancy yoga class wanting to counsel them over what's going on. But inevitably, when we teach yoga, we end up facing emotions. As we move the body, as we release things, emotions come up, and we need to be able to hold space for them. Pregnancy tends to turn the dial of emotions up to extreme. So from week to week, from day to day, from moment to moment, they might be feeling joy and excitement and grief and loss and maybe anger and frustration. The whole range of emotions are coming up. And I think a really good yoga teacher is able to hold space for the whole range of emotions, to give them practices to help move those emotions through their body, and to also know that all emotions are welcome. Just because it's a good emotion or a bad emotion doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just an emotion. It's just a feeling in your body. If you're experiencing anger in this pose today, just notice it, welcome it, see what it's about, explore it, be curious. If you're feeling sadness today, that's okay. You're allowed to be there. You don't have to rush to fix it. And I think this is such a skill as you develop in your teaching, that you don't need to fix everything, that you're not actually there to fix anyone's problems. You're just there to hold space for them to be in their body, in this experience, and in many ways reflect back to them what they need to hear and see and be. So a few examples of how you could do this in your classes: just allowing space for pausing and reflecting and acknowledging where they are. So it might be that you bring them into one of those restorative poses and just ask them a few questions, checking in with the breath, checking in with the body, any physical sensations, any thoughts that might be coming up. It definitely also comes down to the language and the way you talk about emotions. I think if we are quick to label them as good or bad and want to push them away, then I think our students get the message that we want to be working towards feeling peaceful and contented. But that is not reality. We're not going to always feel like that. Certainly not through pregnancy when everything is changing. Instead, I think we want to be careful with our wording and encourage our students to know that all emotions are welcome. You could also include other practices into your classes or at the end of your classes, like journaling, to give your students a few moments to maybe integrate some of the thoughts and feelings and emotions that came up during your classes. This can also be a nice way to then incorporate maybe a circle at the end of your class to foster community, which is going to be so important once they're a new mum. So there are lots of ways that you can bring this in. Again, I don't share any of these mistakes with you to make you feel bad about your teaching. I just want to encourage you to think about and be reflective about your own practice. It isn't about feeling bad about where you're at right now. Everybody is a beginner when they first get started. Even now, 17 plus years into my yoga teaching journey, I am still trying to reflect on my practice and refine what I'm doing and think about how can I make this better for my students, and how can I make this clearer and more concise and give them more space and all those good things. If you would like to learn more about teaching pre or postnatal yoga, I will leave a link below to my online teacher training. And if you want to learn more about teaching pregnancy yoga safely, this is the next video for you.